Very good. Okay, now you can hear me, yeah? So let's talk about Psychoneuro Immunology. This complicated word is actually very simple. So we have the psycho part, which has to do with our thinking and the psychology aspect of things. Then we have the neuro part, neurology, and we intersect there the factor of emotions and so forth. And then immunology, our immune system. Did you know that your thinking and your emotions have a big impact on your immune system? You know this very well. You know, just talk to somebody, for example, going through a difficult relationship. What happens to them? They get sick. You know, they get the cold and different things secondary to the fact that it does have an effect. And this Psychoneuro Immunology, or sometimes called PNI, studies that relationship. See, we are not separate entities. Everything is connected, and when one thing is affected, another part ends up suffering. In fact, this has been studied thoroughly, how the different systems that we have in our body are affected by this. And what affects the brain ends up affecting multiple organs in our bodies, end up affecting different hormonal systems. Those hormonal systems go ahead and send signal, and you start creating that domino type of effect. And did you know that one of the biggest things that you can do for creating that positive change in your brain is something by the name of enthusiasm? Okay? When somebody is enthusiastic, it does have a big effect at the level of your brain. In fact, very interesting study that was published in this paper of neuroscientists. They found out that when an idea is infused in enthusiasm, that idea is more likely to cause a change. And it's interesting, they were doing this study. They had the same idea communicated to two different groups. One was just plainly given, while the other one was infused in enthusiasm. Which one you think made more change? Which one you think people remember the most? Which one people were more likely to absorb and live in their lives? And that is what happens with enthusiasm. Now, this is something that has been studied at the level of brain scans. So when somebody just gives a plain message, it does not have the same effect as if when the person communicates that with a positive feeling. In fact, just to have a positive evaluation has some effect, but when you add enthusiasm to it, the brain lightens up all over the place, meaning that the person is being receptive of that message. And that is something that happens due to a mechanism that we have in our brain by the name of mirror neurons. Okay? We tend to copy what we see. That's why we need to be careful what we watch on television and so forth, because it has an effect on us. In fact, you know this very well. If you see somebody gagging, about to vomit, what happens to you? You feel the same thing, isn't it? Even though you're not sick. How come? You see somebody yawning, what happens to you? You start yawning because of those mirror neurons and we tend to have that effect. This is something that has been studied, and this is not something learned. This is something that we are programmed inside of us. For example, in this study, this person was making faces to this little baby, and the baby started copying. Because of that mirror effect that we have, we tend to copy the behaviors that we see around us. That's why you need to be careful what type of influences you are putting around you. If you're hanging around, with the ones that like the alcohol and bad habits and so forth, I'm telling you, sooner or later, you're going to start doing that. And that's why I'm glad you are here today. If you hang around this type of group of people that wants to have positive changes, that has a positive effect on you. You have that power of effect. And see, look at what happens with the power of influence. One starts, and it's that domino effect that has an influence. So let me show you here. I think I need to do this. I need to go down here, I think. Let me sit there.
All right, let's go. Let's go. Let me hear it. Go, 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 go.
See, one person started, and that one had the effect of, creating enthusiasm in another one, and that other one got that enthusiasm, and it became that positive domino effect until the whole group had that enthusiasm. So, if you say, well, doctor, my problem is that I don't have enthusiasm, what am I going to do? Well, what you're going to do exercise. And this has been very well published in the scientific literature. People who are more physically active are going to express more excitement and enthusiasm compared to those that are not physically active. That's why you can ask, the Snyders. I was staying at their place, Every morning, I would go out to do some nice exercise. You guys have some beautiful places here to do exercise. It's a nice forest here next to this church that I would go running every day. And the nice thing about it, the physical exercise not only has an effect that same day, but that has an effect that lasts for days. So, if you're busy or something, you couldn't go that particular day, the effect of the previous days will have a positive effect on your enthusiasm. And this has been done, studies, not only with humans, but also with animal models. In this study, they put these rats to do treadmill exercises. And they found out that there was a correlation between their ability to experience pleasure and the amount of exercise that they were doing. So, a way to increase pleasure at the level of the brain is by doing exercise. And you can see here, when they started to analyze those brains with the different types of interventions that they were doing, notice how, when you're studying the pleasure side of the brain, how it's nice and colorful. Can you see that? It means that the exercise was literally changing the brains of those rats. So not only were they feeling better, but it was having a positive effect. And the reality is that without enthusiasm, nothing happens. And this has been published very well. You know, you have what is called the intrinsic motivation. It's the one that inside of you, inside of your skin, you have that type of motivation. And this only happens when you are excited about it. If you have that enthusiasm, then you will have that intrinsic motivation. While when somebody has extrinsic motivation, it's something that is not going to last because there is no enthusiasm underlying there. So it's interesting that not only young people can experience those positive changes, but also elderly people, their brain still has the ability to change in a positive fashion. So, as I mentioned to you, if enthusiasm is not there, nothing will happen. And the thing is that even little enthusiasm causes what the neuroscientists call a storm of activation all over your brain. That positive domino effect that will happen at the level of the brain. So this can motivate you to do all those positive changes that we have been talking about the whole week if enthusiasm is there. So let me share with you how the brain is able to change. And notice how this person was enthusiastic about what he was doing, and that helped him make those positive changes.
Hey, it's me, Destin. Welcome back to Smarter Every Day. You've heard people say it's just like riding a bike, meaning it's really easy and you can't forget how to do it, right? But I did something. I did something that damaged my mind. It happened on the streets of Amsterdam, and I got really scared, honestly. I can't ride a bike like you can anymore. Before I show you the video of what happened, I need to tell you the backstory. Like many 6-year-olds with a MacGyver mullet, I learned how to ride a bike when I was really young. I had learned a life skill, and I was really proud of it. Everything changed, though, when my friend Barney called me 25 years later. Where I work, the welders are geniuses, and they like to play jokes on the engineers. He had a challenge for me. He had built a special bicycle, and he wanted me to try to ride it. He had only changed one thing. When you turn the handlebar to the left, the wheel goes to the right. When you turn it to the right, the wheel goes to the left. I thought this would be easy, so I hopped on the bike, ready to demonstrate how quickly I could conquer this.
And here he is, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Destin Sandlin. First attempt riding the bicycle.
All right. So the faster I go, the better. Yeah.
I couldn't do it. You can see that I'm laughing, but I'm actually really frustrated. In this moment, I had a really deep revelation. My thinking was in a rut. This bike revealed a very deep truth to me. I had the knowledge of how to operate the bike, but I did not have the understanding. Therefore, knowledge is not understanding. Look, I know what you're probably thinking. Destin's probably just an uncoordinated engineer and can't do it. But that's not the case at all. The algorithm that's associated with riding a bike in your brain is just that complicated. Think about it. Downwards force on the pedals, leaning your whole body, pulling and pushing the handlebars, gyroscopic precession in the wheels, every single force is part of this algorithm. And if you change any one part, it affects the entire control system. I do not make definitive statements that often, but I'm telling you right now, you cannot ride this bicycle. You might think you can, but you can't. I know this because I'm often asked to speak at universities and conferences, and I take the bike with me. It's always the same. People think they're going to try some trick or they're just going to power through it. It doesn't work. Your brain cannot handle this.
And he continues.
So here's what I did. It was a personal challenge. I stayed out here in this driveway and I practiced about 5 minutes every day. My neighbors made fun of me. I had many wrecks, but after 8 months, this happened. One day I couldn't ride the bike, and the next day I could. It was like I could feel some kind of pathway in my brain that was now unlocked. It was really weird though. It's like there's this trail in my brain, but if I wasn't paying close enough attention to it, my brain would easily lose that neural path and jump back onto the old road it was more familiar with. Any small distractions at all, like a cell phone ringing in my pocket, would instantly throw my brain back to the old control algorithm and I would wreck, but at least I could ride it. My son is the closest person to me genetically, and he's been riding a normal bike for 3 years. That's over half his life. I wanted to know how long it would take him to learn how to ride a backwards bike, so I told him if he learned how to ride a backwards bike, he could go with me to Australia and meet a real astronaut. Are you gonna give up?
No.
Go ahead. This is how it starts. Look at this. This is such a big deal. Get up, you got it. Did you see his brain get it? So he, in, how many weeks have we been doing this? 2 weeks? In 2 weeks, he did something that took me 8 months to do, which demonstrates that a child has more neuroplasticity, am I even saying that right, than an adult. It's clear from this experiment that children have a much more plastic brain than adults. That's why the best time to learn a language is when you're a young child.
All right, today's bike log. I can ride smooth, I can ride fast. I'm thinking the experiment is over.
So now he goes to Holland.
It's backwards, it's backwards. This was one of the most frustrating moments of my life. I had ridden a normal bike since I was 6, but in this moment, I couldn't do it anymore. I had set out to prove that I could free my brain from a cognitive bias. But at this point, I'm pretty sure that all I proved is that I could only redesignate that bias. So what you're not seeing is just a group of people here looking at me, looking at the strange American that can't ride a bike because they think I'm dumb. But I'm actually 2 levels deep into this because I've learned and unlearned. All right. After 20 minutes of making a fool out of myself, suddenly my brain clicked back into the old algorithm. I can't explain it, but it happened in a very specific moment. Got it. I'm back. Oh, it clicked. Hold it, it clicked. I got it. Okay, there it is. There was the moment. Okay, I can ride a bike. I felt like the only person on the planet who had ever unlearned how to ride a bike, and I couldn't articulate it to anyone because everybody just knew that you can't forget how to ride a bike.
So as you can see, many times our thinking is in a certain way, but as you just saw, it's possible to make changes to that thinking. The secret of genius is to carry the spirit of a child into old age, which means never losing your enthusiasm. So when you try just the external motivation, it doesn't last. You may try it for a week or a few days and it's gonna die. But when you have the internal motivation, including that enthusiasm, in fact the word enthuse comes from en, which means inside, and theos, which means God. You need the help of God to have that true enthusiasm to make those positive changes, to have that extrinsic motivation. And the impact of enthusiasm, as I mentioned to you, has been published quite a bit. In fact, in this study, they were showing that the teachers that have enthusiasm, their students are more likely to have higher notes and understand the material much better compared to those that don't. And the conclusion of the study was because enthusiasm causes intrinsic motivation to move forward. And there was a correlation. How enthusiastic the teacher was, how enthusiastic the students were going to be. And this is very well documented. So in this other study, they were demonstrating that when the teacher has enthusiasm, the students are less likely to cheat. Okay? They are more likely to get engaged in the subject. They are more likely to apply that information, and they are more likely to remember long term the information that is being communicated. So we need to be training teachers to have that motivation. And you know, in this study, they were showing that there's multiple characteristics that a teacher can have, but the characteristic that is most correlated to affecting positively the students is enthusiasm. And this was very clearly documented. A significant increase in life in the group that maintained curiosity, gratitude, optimism, humor, and enthusiasm. When you follow up people in the long term, who is going to have the best quality of life, the best length of years? Those that have that enthusiasm in their lives. So as we mentioned, isn't it? Enthusiasm from the word en and theos. So as Paul says, it is good to be zealously affected always in a good thing, and not only when I am present with you. So the teacher communicates that enthusiasm, and the teacher doesn't necessarily need to be present there to continue to have that positive effect on those people that are hearing. And you know, in the Bible, it talks about this. For example, Deuteronomy 6:6-8. And these words which I command thee this day shall be in thy heart. Where is that heart? That intrinsic side of things that we've been talking about. And thou shalt teach them how? Boringly. It says there, isn't it? Diligently unto thy children, and talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lay down, and when you rise up. Teach them how? Diligently. That's the way that we need to get this information. One of the sources that we can also get some enthusiasm is the source of religion. Now, religion sometimes has a negative connotation, but you know, when you analyze where does the word religion comes from, depending who you ask is the definition you find. For example, according to Augustine, religion comes from the Latin re-eligere, which means to choose over and over again. While Cicero says that religion comes from relegere, which means to read over and over again. That's why you don't read the scriptures just one time. You have to continue that process of feeding your mind, and by doing that, it has a positive effect on you. And Lactantius says that religion comes from the word religare, which means to bind over and over again. And again, that's why this is a daily process, yes or no? You have to every day consecrate yourself, and in that way you can have that positive effect. So enthusiastic people throughout the history of this world have had positive effect on those that have listened to that message. One of them is Whitefield, a revivalist. He traveled 5,000 miles back when he was, horse and buggy, preaching, and he was going to the east, to the west, to the north, to the south. And one time he had 25,000 people that came to hear, to listen to him. 12,000 in Philadelphia, 8,000 in New York. And it is estimated that 1/4 quarter of the whole country of America listened to his message with enthusiasm. And Benjamin Franklin wrote on his diary when he went and listened to him. And notice how he described this Whitfield. He says that every accent, every emphasis, every modulation of his voice was so perfectly well tuned and well placed that without being interested in the subject, one could not help but being pleased with the discourse. A pleasure of much the same kind which that received from an excellent piece of music. Because that message was being given with enthusiasm, it was like listening to beautiful music, says Benjamin Franklin. I happened soon after to attend one of his sermons, in the course of which I perceived he intended to finish with a collection. And I silently resolved he should get nothing from me. I had in my pocket a handful of copper money, 3 or 4 silver dollars, and 5 pistols, which was these coins of gold back then. And he proceeded, I began to soften and concluded to give the coppers. Another stroke of his oratory made me ashamed of that and determined me to give the silver. And he finished so admirably that I emptied my pocket wholly to the collector's dish, gold and all. Can you see the effect that enthusiasm had? Even somebody that was close and didn't want it to respond, through those words of enthusiasm, his heart was softened. So many times we need to understand that until a man finds a cause for which he is willing to die, he is not fit to live. So when you have that type of vision in your heart, that propels you forward. But many times when the thinking is wrong, our own thinking pulls us down and stops us from going forward. For example, some people think that they're not smart enough, that they're not successful enough, that they're not attractive enough, that they don't have enough talent so that they can feel happy and fulfilled. As if those things are what makes you happy and fulfilled. That's not necessarily true. Or they think that the reason why they have all these negative feelings is because of others. And you know, there's some elements of truth. Bad things happen to all of us. And sometimes life gives us some hits and so forth. But the problem with this way of thinking is that this type of thinking makes us feel victims, as if there is nothing we can do, and we are just like a boat without a rudder and without a motor, just going and floating in the sea of life, which it is not true. We can choose and we can change the way we think. But if you understand that it is possible to change your basic beliefs and your values, this change can become long-term. And this can have a positive effect on your mood, on your outlook, on your productivity. And we know that negative thinking has negative effects. This is some of the data of our study, and we were documenting how the level of hope in our patients improved 95% in a matter of 10 days. This is how fast, when you understand that you have the ability to change your thinking, you can have a very positive effect. In fact, I even published this paper demonstrating how a marker that shows how well your thinking is, your enthusiasm, and different aspects is something called emotional intelligence, is you're able to change this emotional intelligence in a matter of weeks as you start practicing and applying these principles in the real life. So, in order to understand how we can practically change the way we think, we need to understand how the thinking process takes place in us. And this is what is called the ABC. Now, we have a activating event. Every single day, we are facing activating events. Somebody shouts to us. A friend of us that is a good friend of us doesn't say hi to us even though he passed in front of us. We are ready to go for our jobs, and as we're coming out of the house, we slip and boom, we get put a big stain on our clothes. We are cooking some meal, our phone rings, and we are so distracted, we burn the meal. Every single day, multiple times throughout the day, we have activating events. Now here comes the question. Does the activating event directly gives you an emotional consequence? Yes or no? The answer is no. That is not the way it works. How do I know that? Well, you can have 10 people here watching exactly the same thing. How come they respond so differently? For some, this is a big deal. For some other one, they may even laugh about it. And for some other ones, they don't even care. Yes or no? I mean, I can just say a word. I can say, Donald Trump. Man, some people get upset just by listening to that name. Some people say, woo! And some other ones don't care. See, why is the reaction so differently? Because the activating event does not directly give you an emotional consequence. In fact, if you think that it's like that, the psychologists say that you have crooked thinking, as if you don't have any ability to influence that activating event. The real way that the brain works is the following. You have A, activating event, C, emotional consequence, but in the middle between the activating event and the emotional consequence, you have a belief system. The belief system is what determines what type of emotional consequence you will have. You want an example of that? If I say, nobody should dial my cell phone after 10 p.m., that's my belief system. Question, what happens if my cell phone rings after 10 p.m.? Oh, there's going to be joy and happiness in my heart, isn't it? No, because the belief system is wrong, the emotional consequence will be wrong. See, the problem was not the cell phone, isn't it? It was the belief system that I had that caused that activating event to give me a negative emotional consequence. So that's why we need to focus at changing those basic beliefs and values. Here's another example. A, activating event. My boss said that my nose is too big. Emotional consequence. I feel mad and angry. I might slap him. I might tell him off and demand an apology. Why is he thinking that? Well, belief system and self-talk. He has no right to talk to me that way. He should not have insulted me. He's a fool. I cannot stand saying that. Can you see how that belief system combined with that event is giving you a very negative emotional consequence? So what are you going to do? You're going to use the D of dispute. Wait a minute. I'm making myself mad. He doesn't control my anger. Who controls your anger? We control our anger. I'm annoyed, but I don't have to get angry. I prefer he wouldn't talk to me that way, but I am responsible for my own anger. And you know, these principles of changing the way you think are not something of modern psychology. Even in the scriptures you find these principles. For example, Philippians 4:8. It gives you an excellent guideline of what type of thinking to have. It says, if something is true, if something is honest, if something is just, and it continues with the list, if there's any virtue and if there's any praise, what do? You think on these things. So as you go through the day, evaluate and see, is this word my attention? Is this word me getting stressed about it or not? You have the ability to change the current of your thinking. And to me it's very interesting. Jesus gives us a very nice lesson on how to change our way of thinking. Let's go and close with that lesson that he left us. We picked up in the book of Luke, if you have a Bible, if you want to follow, Luke verse 24. In it is just after the crucifixion, the disciples were tremendously discouraged. And please notice how Jesus used this principle of the A, B, C to change the way these disciples felt and were thinking. Let's go and pick it up. It's Luke 24, and we start on verse 13. Now behold, two of them were traveling the same day to a village called Emmaus, which was 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they talked together of all these things which had happened. So it was, while they conversed and reasoned, that Jesus himself went with them. So number one, he starts reasoning with them. Verse 16, but their eyes were restrained so that they did not know him. And he said to them, what kind of conversation is this that you have with one another as you walk and are what? Sad. Verse 18, then one of them, whose name was Cleophas, answered and said to him, are you the only stranger in Jerusalem, and have you not known the things which happened there in these days? And he said to them, what things? Why was he asking them? Because he wanted them to recognize what was happening. So they said to him, the things concerning Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how the chief priests and our rulers delivered him to be condemned to death and crucified him. And continues verse 21, but we were hoping that it was he who was going to redeem Israel. Indeed, besides all this, today is the third day since these things happened. So, number one, he starts reasoning with them. Number two, he starts identifying their emotions. And let's go back to a little chart. Remember, the what? A, B, C, remember? So let's take this story and let's fill those blanks. What was the activating event? What was the belief system? And what was the emotional consequence? So let's go and fill in the blanks. First of all, what was the activating event? Jesus had died on the cross, and that was the trigger of this story. Emotional consequence. How was the emotional status of these disciples? What did we just read? They were what? They were sad. They had lost hope. Or also, if you continue reading there, he calls them slowness of heart. Now, here comes the important part. We have the activating event, we have the emotional consequence, but between the activating event and the emotional consequence, what do we say is there? The belief. What was their belief? Their belief was wrong. That's why they end up with a negative emotional consequence. For the disciples, they thought that Jesus was going to be a military leader, that he was going to build this nice army, and they were going to go and fight against the Romans and all the enemies that they had around. And that was not the mission of Jesus. It was the wrong belief system. Therefore, when the activating event came, of course they were going to have a very negative emotional consequence. So they needed a dispute. Remember, like the example we just saw, that they needed to dispute those irrational beliefs so that we can change the emotional consequence. And that's what happened. So look at the therapy that Jesus applied. Verse 26. Ought not the Christ to have suffered these things and to enter into his glory? Jesus asked them. And this is the therapy. And beginning where? Moses. Which book Moses wrote? Genesis. So from the very beginning, they started analyzing. There's multiple prophecies throughout the Old Testament that told with detail what type of life Jesus was going to live. So beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. So you have the whole therapy of rational, emotive, spiritual therapy. And what caused that positive change? The disciples started changing their thinking. 31, then their eyes were open and they knew him, and he vanished from their sight. And they say to one another, did not, what part? Our hearts, remember the enthusiasm, the intrinsic motivation? Notice how that changed their heart. They started having intrinsic motivation. Did not our hearts burn within us while he talked to us on the road and while he opened the scripture to us? So they rose up that very hour and returned to Jerusalem and found the 11 and those who were with them gathered together, saying, the Lord is risen indeed and has appeared to Simon. And they told about the things that had happened on the road and how he was known to them in the breaking of bread. Can you see their change of the disciples? From being a group of discouraged people, now they had enthusiasm and they wanted to tell others about this. So this is the way that it worked, this therapy. A activating event was the crucifixion of Jesus. B, now they understood that this was prophesied and this was the fulfillment of what was written there before. C, they had been sad, but now they had joy as they understood the real meaning. and the dispute, those wrong belief systems were removed. How were those wrong belief systems were removed? Using what? Bible therapy. Okay? Do you think that still works today in 2022? Absolutely. You can use that tool to remove all those wrong belief systems that we many times speak up as we grow. So from disillusion to passion and a mission, and now they had courage to go forward. And the progression went like this. First it was Jesus, then it was 12 disciples, then it was 70, then it was 5,000, but then everybody ran away and it was only 12. And then it was only one at crucifixion. But then Jesus was crucified and we started at 0 again. But then what we just read, it started just with one. As Jesus went back and talked to these disciples, now those 12 disciples were enthusiastic. From those 12, it went to 120. From those 120, it went to 3,120 if you read the book of Acts. Then to 8,120, and 10 to multitudes and throughout the world, including this building here. Somebody told somebody that told somebody that told somebody, and as a result of that meeting that we just read, you can see that change. In closing, even the thoughts must be brought into subjection to the will of God, and the feelings under the control of reason and religion. Our imagination was not given to us to allow to run riot and have its own way without any effort at restraining and discipline. If the thoughts are wrong, what's going to happen? The feelings will be wrong. And the thoughts and feelings combined make up the moral character. So may you apply these principles of enthusiasm, and may you have that intrinsic motivation to go forward and change the way we think. Thank you very much.